Thank you all and welcome back. It's a very exciting time for me today because now I don't get to show you fluff, but instead I get to tell you all the cool things that you can do that we've talked about earlier today. But not only that, I get to show you on some real live servers and some real live code. So for this first session, we're going to talk about application management. With the advent of System Center 2012, we're really focused on the application now. How is that application performing? How can I more easily deploy that application? I really don't want, as a IT guy, to get in the way of my application owners, and I want those application owners to be able to deploy their applications as fast as possible and get them out there to decrease the time to market, which will allow me as an organization to more efficiently run my operations. So we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about the application delivery lifecycle, how that application gets deployed. Talk about now self-service with System Center 2012 and what we can do to help provide that. One of the biggest things and challenges that we've heard our customers say is they want a consistent way to deploy these applications. And after they're deployed, a consistent way to monitor or upgrade these applications. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about monitoring performance. You've seen a little bit of that earlier today. And how we integrate or work with Windows Azure. So to get started, a lot of organizations today, they want to have these applications that are scalable, that can handle changes in workloads very easily, that are standardized. So when they deploy them multiple times, they get the same release out, the same solutions out there, and then they're predictable, meaning that they know what's going to happen, and if something happens, they have a response for it. And they do that through a few things that we provide. The first one is Server App V. How many here are familiar with application virtualization or App V on the client side? Well, Server App V is taking that client-side application or the server-side application and packaging it up so that I can more easily deploy this application. Not only that, I can take the application and I can copy the state of that application, and then if I need to update that application, it becomes as simple as either lifting that application up, dropping in a new OS, and throwing it back down, or taking that updated version of the application, pulling out the state, and dropping in the updates to the new application. I want to have this consistent delivery. With VMM 2012 inside of System Center, I have the ability to create a service template. And a service template allows me to create a consistent delivery method for deploying my application, whether it's in development, staging, or production. I need to know how that application is performing, and I need to know it in such a way that I can intelligently have conversations with my developers and the infrastructure owners and ensure that the application is getting the best performance it can and I'm meeting my SLAs. And then lastly, I want to have control of what's being deployed. I don't want a business unit or an application owner to go out there and deploy their own OS with their own applications and not take the proper, not use the applications that have the proper policies and the proper agents on them so that I can monitor them. So what happens is I want to have control over what gets deployed and how it gets deployed. And I can provide that with System Center 2012. So when we look at the application delivery lifecycle, one of the things we've heard from our customers is that there's this plan on how they bring applications to light in an organization. They have a spec, and that spec determines whether they're going to develop it internally or they're going to buy something off the shelf that provides that service. Within the new model, within System Center 2012, I can take that specification and provide a service template modeled on that specification. If it's a 3-tier application, I can create a service template that has 3 different tiers, each of those tiers handling things like the web server, the application server, and the database server. Once I have this service template created, I can now deploy that application. One of the cool things that System Center 2012 provides me is the ability on deployment to customize that application. Meaning that when I deploy this application to development, I'm going to talk to the development SQL server, let's say. But when I take that same application and deploy it to production, I don't want to keep talking back to that development SQL server. Instead, I want to talk to the development or the production SQL server I have out there. So having the ability to, at deployment time, customize the install so that it talks to the correct servers or services gives me an advantage of having a consistent delivery with the ability to customize it for my environment. Now, when I have this application and service deployed, the next thing is I want to be able to make updates to this application. Over time, I may need to update the app, or I may need to change and update items on the machine itself, maybe a hotfix or a service pack or something like that. And I want to have a consistent way to provide that update. So we'll talk a little bit about all these things today, this afternoon right now, and then we'll also talk a little more during the infrastructure session on some of these as well. So with System Center 2012, we provide application self-service, a way of moving IT out of the way for the business owners to be able to deploy faster, but still having that control that we need. We do that through things like App Controller and Operations Manager. So by enabling self-service, we can delegate the ability to do things like deploy applications or do things like change state of the application, turn it on, turn it off, those types of things. But we as IT administrators can control what types of capabilities they can perform on those environments. We can create things like quota that specifies this user only has this amount of resources within this cloud, so they can't use up all my resources. When an application owner wants to deploy that application, they can see exactly how much quota they have available, so then they can determine whether they can deploy that application or if they have to free up resources before they can. Secondly, we can empower now the application owners through role-based administration so that they can deploy these applications as they need to without having to, every time they need to deploy a VM, go to IT and say, hey, can you deploy this for me? We can build in self-service, which will decrease the amount of time it takes for them to be productive. And by doing that, we can increase return to the organization. And we do that by giving them the ability to see specific access to specific virtual machines or services, and they can use those services and deploy them themselves without having to call me up every time they want to deploy an application. And then lastly, we can give them a single management point for these virtualized environments. So that means that I can manage both my on-premises private cloud environments as well as services I may have deployed in, say, Windows Azure, all from the same console, which means that now my organization is able to use the same techniques for both deploying applications on premises or in something like Windows Azure. And you'll see how this looks in a few moments. So with that, what I'm going to do is flip over to our demo and show you a little bit about how we do this application self-service through App Controller. All right, so in my demo environment here, we have App Controller. And like Claire showed before, earlier in the day, that we have an environment where I'm a user and it has control over who I am. And in this case, I'm logged in as myself. And for me, I'm an administrator in this environment. So what you're going to see is that I have full access and capability to all the different clouds within my environment. I haven't deployed a service yet, so I haven't used any of my resources. That's the 0 over here on how much used. But also, I have, as an administrator in this environment, I have unlimited access to these resources. So I can deploy as many servers as I want. The nice thing about this is, as an administrator, I can do what I need to do to provide the services that the organization needs, but what I can also do is specify a limit to the amount of resources, say, a cloud user I want to give them. The other thing you're going to see is that within one app controller environment, I can see both of my clouds that I have access to. Not only do I have access to my on-premises private cloud environment, my VMM clouds, I also have access to different Windows Azure subscriptions. And what this means is that I can deploy applications and services on-premises or up in Windows Azure and be able to do that within the same console. And we can see the services that are already deployed. As we see here, I have a few different services depending on if they're Windows Azure services that are deployed or on-premises clouds. And one of the nice things is I can view this in such a way that it explains what's happening with this environment quickly at a summary view, or I can drill down into any of these services. So I have a couple of different clouds on premises. I have a pre-prod cloud where I'm going to stage my environment first before I move it into production, and then I have a production cloud. And I have a couple of different services that are the exact same service deployed on both clouds, but they're talking within each other. And I can take a look at what these clouds mean or look like in the environment. And I can see that this expenses pre-prod cloud is a 3-tier application, and it has 3 different servers, one for each tier, and it has 3 VMs deployed. One of those VMs is deployed for each tier. And if I can't get the information I need from this small view, I can open up the diagram and it'll pull up that environment for me. From here, I can do a lot of different things. If I wanted to, I could shut down this entire service. And by simply right-clicking on the service and hitting stop, it'll shut down all the different virtual machines in that service and shut down the entire service. Or I can do things at the tier level, like my front-end web tier right here. Maybe I need more resources. We showed during the demo earlier today that as the resource utilization picked up, I needed to scale out that resource. Well, we did it automatically, but I could also do it here manually. If I know I'm going to need these resources earlier, I could just log in, scale them out manually, and be done with it. The other thing is I can look at an existing virtual machine and see what kind of information I know about it, how big it is, how much RAM, that type of thing. I can add things like a cost center tag if I wanted to allocate that this thing was dedicated to my cost center, those types of things. And I can see other things like which network it's connected to, etc. So this is an already deployed service, but I can also, if I want to deploy a brand new service, do that through this tool as well. So as an administrator, I have full access to all these different resources. As a self-service user, I'd have access to just the resources that I have been granted access to. But either way, if I want to deploy a new service, I simply click deploy. And at this point, it asks me, which cloud do I want to deploy to? I have a couple options here. I can deploy to my on-premises private cloud or my Windows Azure subscriptions by simply clicking the cloud I want to deploy as to. So I'll pick production, and it'll tell me if I have any quota available. And it seems like I have unlimited quota. Well, being an administrator does have its privileges. So I will now deploy a brand new service to this cloud. Once I pick the production cloud, I can choose which service template to deploy. Now I have a lot of different options here, but the service template that I want to deploy is this Contoso Expenses Manager 1.0. So I'll pick it. Again, it shows me that I need to have at least 3 virtual machines. Since I have unlimited access, I can deploy to all of them. So I'll just say OK here. And then it brings up each of those different tiers, and I can fill out the different configuration information for each of those tiers. So under instance, I could fill out any extra information. Like if I wanted to statically give it a default name or something like that, I could type in my own name, or I can just use the default, which is what I'll use for the tiers. I also want to give this a actual service name, so when it deploys, I'll know that this one's different from the other ones that I have there. So I'll call this MMS 2012 Istanbul. And I can fill in a cost center here. And I can decide whether things like I want normal, high, or low priority. So after filling this information in, I can hit OK. If I filled in any information on each of the instances, they would take. And then at the point where I'm finished deploying or finished configuring this thing, I hit deploy. At that point, it kicks off a job, talks to Virtual Machine Manager, and starts the deployment process. And what we'll see is that the deployment started, and we'll probably see it refresh up here fairly soon as it goes through the job process. What I, as administrator, am allowing myself to do is deploy these different services and see what happened. Well, it looks like it failed. And one of the nice things here is I can click on the service or look on the job and see what actually happened and why it failed. And it'll give me information here. I can also then take this information here and look at my Virtual Machine Manager service and figure out why that machine failed. Well, I'm just going to delete it out of here, because what we have here now is the ability to see all the other virtual machine environments that I already have deployed. So I already have 3 of these different services deployed, and right here you can see that this one application is a 3-tier application and has the 3 different virtual machines for each of those different tiers. One of the things we're using when we deploy these applications is a technology called Server App V. And what Server App V, I talked about earlier, gives me the ability to see or package that application up. And if we look at these different tiers, like the middle tier here, we can see that it has an application package called Contoso Expense Manager. By having a package like that, I've really avoided all those extra post-deployment configuration tasks that I always have to do. In other words, when I deploy an application, we've had customers say they have a 126-page runbook just for post-installation configuration tasks, like setting registry keys, connections back to the data center or the database server, those types of things. By packaging the application in a Server App V package, I can minimize a lot of those post-install runbook steps and get this application deployed much faster with much less human error. All right, so that shows you the self-service capabilities within App Controller and within System Center 2012. Next, what we'll do is we'll talk about how do I get these applications to deploy the same way every time? And how do I troubleshoot something if something goes wrong or I need to update that application? Well, if we look at the way applications were running before, or what people are normally doing today, is they'll have a standard application running on its operating system. And this application is usually married to the operating system so that once it's installed, I have to maintain both the application and the operating system together if I want to do things like move it to another system, because I've made so many tweaks between the 2 systems that I can't pull one away from the other. What I want to do is be able to take that type of traditional deployment and break those bonds a little bit so that I can take that application and manage it independently of the underlying OS. And I want to be able to do that consistently so that every time I deploy that application, it's the same way and it gets deployed and I know it's going to work. So I want to be able to deliver that consistent application feel. And I can do that by abstracting that application installed, whether it's using Server App V for the app tier, or it's using an MS deploy package for the web tier, or it's using a SQL DAC pack for the SQL tier. I can abstract that application away from the underlying OS, which means that now I can make changes to one or the other and move this application where I need to without having to have that linkage between the operating system and the application. So how does that work? It works through this use of service templates. So if we go back into VMM here, we see that we have this service. Well, the service was built off of a template. And if we look here, the template's called Contoso Expense Manager, and it's version 1.0. Well, let's go and look at what a service template actually looks like. So if I open up the library inside of Virtual Machine Manager, we'll see all the different templates that we have available to us. And if I click on Service Templates, we'll see the service templates that are available. The Contoso Expenses Manager is the one that we were looking at, this one right here. And if we right-click on it, it's actually this one up here. If we right-click on it, what we can do is we can open up the designer. We've now created this new drag-and-drop designer that allows me to take the VM templates that I have created and basically just drag and drop them together to create this service template model. So I have this Contoso Expenses Manager. It's made up of 3 virtual machine templates: the web service tier, the front end tier, and the SQL tier. And each of those has packages assigned to them. So like this web services tier has the Contoso Expenses Manager package, as well as the Contoso Expense Manager Server App V package assigned to it. And that gives me, that's the makeup of the application. It also has information about things like what's the OS, how big is the machine, how many processors, those types of things. One of the things we added with VMM within System Center 2012 is the ability, when we deploy an application, to do things that we weren't able to do before. If you look at what a virtual machine template is in VMM 2012, it's the same things as what you would expect from different virtualization vendors. You have the hardware configuration, which has things like how many processors, the memory, whether it's highly available, those types of things. You have the OS configuration. In other words, when I install this application, what domain is it going to join? What's the machine name going to be? Those types of things. But one of the things that we've added with VMM 2012 is the ability at deployment time to do things like add roles and features to this application. So how many people here, every time they install a server, have to install that .NET 3.5.1 feature within Windows Server 2008 R2? One of the nice things within VMM is that I can choose that feature is already deployed, so that when I deploy this service, not only will it deploy the OS, join it to the domain, but it'll also enable the roles and features that I've asked it to enable before I even have to go in and do any post-customization work. So what this means is that I can remove a few of those extra steps that I had to do for deploying this application. The other thing is that I can choose what kind of application is deployed within this environment. And that application in this example here is a web application. So I have a MS deploy package for this web tier, and I can store that information. So I deployed this thing a while ago. I created an MS deploy package. I can take that package and store it in my library. Now when I deploy the OS, after it deploys the OS and does all that post configuration, it'll take that MS deploy package and install it on the machine and update the website to be the website I need for this application itself to run. I have pre and post install command scripts. So what that means is that I can do any pre-work I need to do, any post-job customization through these scripts. And then I can even create custom scripts that do things before I even start to deploy the application if I want. So we've added within VMM 2012 two things that I think are really important and different than any other virtualization vendor out there. First of all, the ability to add the roles and services inside the VM template itself. And then secondly, this ability to do the application install automatically afterwards, whether it be an MS deploy package, a SQL DAC package, or a server app V package. So once I put all those things together, the other thing I want to do and I want to maintain is the ability for this application to scale. So we showed earlier, we talked a few minutes ago about the ability to take a tier and scale it out as the load increases on this environment. That ability is available due to the fact that within the service template, we've set how this machine can scale. So we've set the parameters around this machine saying, hey, this machine can be scaled out. I want a default instance of 1, meaning that when I first deploy this application, I want one of these OSs deployed. But I want to be able to scale up to 5 copies of this application, because when I get under heavy load, I need a load-balanced web pool that can handle the traffic. So what we allow you to do is create the ability to set a minimum and a maximum amount. And because we have the ability to set minimum and maximum amounts, we can also specify when I want to update this application. Do I update this whole tier at once? Or can I set multiple upgrade domains? Sorry. In this environment, I have the ability to set an upgrade domain of, say, 1, or I can set it to 2 or 3 or 4. And what that means is that for the number of virtual machines deployed, it will take that number and divide the number by the upgrade domains, and it will only bring down at servicing time that many VMs the first time. Then once those come back up, then it'll bring down in the next set and the next set. So I can update this application without actually losing the tier as it's running. So once I put all those things together, I can do things like version this application. I can set cost center and description of this application as well. Save, and then it becomes an application that's available to be deployed. And I can do it multiple ways. I showed you how to do it via Service Manager or via App Controller. I can also do that same deployment of the application via VMM right here by just right-clicking on the service and saying Configure Deployment, and it'll go through the steps where I'll type in the name. I'll pick a location to put it. And then it'll go through and build out the different tiers, figure out which host to run this machine on, and figure out where to place these hosts. And if it can't do it, I'll get some error messages that'll explain to me why I'm having a problem. And I'll be able to do things. Let me minimize this out. Like look at any one of these machines and look at the ratings and determine what's going on with the system, why can or can't it be deployed. So I look at the system and it says it's okay, I can deploy it to this physical host. So I have all that information available to me. If it was a red X, it would tell me why it couldn't deploy it, and I'd be able to then troubleshoot that, set it up so that now my self-service users can deploy. All right, so we talked about whoops. All right, we talked about self-service. We talked about delivering these consistent applications. The next thing we want to talk about is the ability of monitoring how that application is performing. So within the application, whether I'm an end user, I'm the network operations guy, or I'm a developer, I want to be able to see what's happening with that application and have the same view across these different platforms. So if I'm a network operations guy, I'm going to use the Operations Manager console, and I'll see what's happening with my environment. In this case, I'm looking at the network, the underlying physical network. But if I'm an end user, I may not want them to have full access to the Operations Manager console, but they need to see specific views. So I can delegate that access through the web client and give them just access to the views I want them to have. And in this case, that same view of my network systems. Lastly, I may want to publish this as a dashboard so that an exec or someone like that can go in and look at the different services and see how well we're performing. So again, I can publish as SharePoint web parts that exact same information, and they can see, no matter which tool they're using, the same piece of information, which means they can talk together and everybody's speaking the same language because they know, they see the same information. So with System Center 2012, we provide this complete application monitoring solution. We get server-side monitoring, meaning we can monitor that code as it's being executed and find out where their trouble is, whether it's not performing, period, or it's delayed or lagged. We have client-side monitoring, where we can connect to the application as if we were a client and see things like, are we hitting any latency, or are we not able to get to specific web pages? So not only can we monitor it from the server side up, but we can monitor from the cloud or the client side into the application. And then lastly, we can create pre-recorded transactions that we send to the environment to test whether or not certain web pages are available or that we're hitting the right latency. And we can get back answers and determine whether they're the right answers or there's something unexpected. And if they are, we can throw alerts. And we can use the same tools across all these different ways of monitoring that application, which becomes important because we have a lot of customers that tell us, I have an application and it's not always performing right. And every time I look at it, all my hardware is running just fine. So I talk to the dev guy or the application owner, and they say, no, it's not my code. If the application is not performing right, it's not the hardware. Maybe it's the code. And the dev guy said, no, the code's fine. On my box, everything works just great. And then the people running the physical server, they're saying, hey, our servers are good, the infrastructure's well. So trying to find that root cause of the problem without a lot of finger pointing and to really decrease the time for that becomes important. Because if the application's down, either your customers aren't going to be satisfied or you're losing money. And we want to decrease the amount of time it takes to do that. So with Operations Manager, we allow you to do that exactly. We have both the server-side monitoring, which says, hey, the application itself seems to be functioning. The services that we were monitoring are up. The VM itself is running just fine. But the client side is saying, hey, I'm seeing that there are a lot of page faults, and I'm getting these yellow warnings, so I'm not hitting my SLAs. And by being able to see all that from within these dashboards that you can create, we can start to determine and troubleshoot where that problem lies. And once we do that, we can quickly solve the problem. Is it a hardware issue? Is it a software issue? Let's figure it out together. So let's take a look a little bit about that. So inside of Operations Manager, we have the ability to create these customized dashboards. So this is the demo we were looking at, demo 2 with Claire and I, where, oh no, this is the third demo, I'm sorry, where we have that application up and running, and we see availability, everything's running fine. This application over the past day has been running flawlessly. We haven't had any outages, we're running at 100%. Our SLA is 99%, so if we had an outage for 10 minutes or something, we would be under our SLAs. But our transaction processing, the time it takes to process these transactions, is way higher than what we expect and what we've planned for. So our target is 7 seconds. This thing needs to respond back in less than 7 seconds. But it's not. It's taking over 25 seconds right now to perform that. And I can use Operations Manager and see that it was performing fine this morning, and then all of a sudden things just started getting worse and worse and worse today. So I can go in now and look at any one of these problems and pull up what's going on within this application. So I think this will let me pull it up right here. No, that won't let me pull it up there. And I can do that through the application dashboard. So what I'll do here is I'll pull up on the Expense Manager for the active alerts. We're going to see that inside of this application we are having some challenges. I have a couple of alerts. Some things are running, some things are not. And I can take one of these applications and drill down into what's actually happening within that application. So it's going to pull up that alert. And inside the alert, come on. Here we go. We're going to see that this critical application, this IAS app pool, was down, and it happened about 20 hours ago, and that's probably why this application isn't performing well. So then I can go through and look at if this was a hardware problem or something. I can look at what's the product knowledge. This is done through just our monitoring management packs, and if I had any specific company knowledge, I can figure that out right there. Or I can drill down into that problem and go and look at the application itself. So I have the ability now to view not only the performance and what's happening within that application, but also I can view maybe why it failed and what types of things I need to do to fix it. And I have under here, I have this app diagnostics view. And this is the web page that allows me to view basically the same types of information. And I can look here and see if there's any informational or any type of errors. And then on any one of these errors, I can pull that up and see what's the information happening through the error. And this shows the same kind of screen that we saw earlier today, where I have this SQL client exception. I can do things like show the parameters, all that stuff that we looked at earlier, which shows me what's happening, why it's taking so long, and then I can pass this information, like we showed earlier, to my developers and say, hey, fix your problem, because it's a development problem inside of there. All right, so we've seen the application performance monitoring through Operations Manager. The next thing is I want to provide this consistent experience, whether it's on-premises or I'm using public cloud, say Windows Azure or something like that. And in fact, I'm going to show you something that we showed at MMS a little while ago that says, what if it's not Windows Azure, but a hoster that's providing me some services? How can I look at that as well? So managing applications across multiple clouds. I may have an application where I want my SQL tier on premises, but I want my web tier up at my hoster or at Windows Azure. I want to have a way of deploying these pieces, bringing them all together in a consistent view, and seeing this as an application as a whole. And by using Operations Manager, I can do that, because App Controller will allow me to deploy the pieces of the service on premises and another service up in the cloud. And I can do this with just the website with App Controller. But Operations Manager will allow me to monitor the on-premises and the private public cloud piece together and show it in a consistent view. So here what I'm able to do is see both my on-premises services, like my app and data tier, as well as my Windows Azure services, which are my web front end, and I can see it all from one consistent view. So I don't have, so when a problem is occurring with that application, I can drill down into that application and find out, is it the stuff on premises, is it the stuff in Windows Azure, and what that actually looks like. So before I go into this, I'll show one more quick demo. And this demo is an update to our App Controller program here. So let me just close this and let me just go from here. So I didn't set this one up. Which means that I can't type very well. Sorry. Well, what we do is within App Controller, we have the ability now not only to add on-premises private cloud and Windows Azure, but also our service providers through our service provider framework. So I'm going to log in as our corporate vice president, Takeshi, and what we're going to see is that I have two clouds here, or two cloud environments here. I have on premises, I have a connection to Contoso, which has four different clouds that I have access to, and I have also access to my Windows Azure environment. But I want to also connect to my service provider, which is at a totally different site, and I want to run and manage the VMs that are running over there. To do that, I would simply go under my settings connections here, and I would add a connection to the service provider framework. And what I'm doing here is I'm connecting to this hoster, and we'll call it Fabricam. And they've given me a URL to connect to. So let me pull that up real quick here. And what this allows me to do is connect to a secondary VMM server that I don't own, that I have no domain access to. All I have is a link and a certificate. So we'll connect to this link here, and then we'll browse to the certificate file. This certificate is the file that they asked me. I have an Azure file here, but I also have under SPF the Fabricam certificate. So this hoster sent me a URL and a certificate file, and when I connect with those files in the right password, then it will allow me to see the virtual machines that they've given me permission to see the clouds that they've given me permissions to see. So what you'll see now is that as I add that, if I go back to my clouds view, not only do I have the existing clouds on premises, and my staging, my Azure cloud as well, but I'm also, as this thing refreshes, add that gold cloud from my hosting provider. And in this gold cloud, I have possibly specific quotas that they've assigned to me, but if not, either way, I can deploy a new service. So I basically, from that gold cloud, hit deploy, and I have the option of what kind of virtual machines to deploy. I can deploy them from my on-premises system, I can deploy them from the Fabricam hosting provider, or from Windows Azure. So I'll pick the Fabricam hosting provider, hit OK. And then the next thing I'll do is select a template from the list of servers that they've given me access to deploy. And they've only given me access to deploy a type of virtual machine. It's a Win8 server virtual machine, has one CPU, 512 megs of RAM. And so I can click that and just go through the steps to deploy that server the same way I could deploy an application or service on premises. So what that means now is that I have the ability to deploy on premises, in Windows Azure, or at a hosting provider, all from within the same tool, and it'll handle how it connects to and deploys those services at those different locations. So what you've seen today is how we walk through the application lifecycle through creating the specification for the application, defining what it's going to look like so we can provision those pieces of the application to the VMM library. Then we create a service template off of those parts that we've provisioned to the library, put that all together with the specifications as far as things like how I'm going to scale, or if I'm going to be able to scale that application out. We'll be able to customize the deployment of that application. In other words, I can take that application, I can make any specific changes that are just for that deployment, like which SQL server it needs to talk to, or which web server, or how many, what type of certificate, or whatever it is that I need to add there. I can customize that at deployment time. Then I can deploy the service, and as I need to make updates, I can update that service and do all of this in a consistent and controlled manner. So what we've shown you today is that applications, the new way of doing applications allows for better self-service so that I can decrease the amount of time it takes to get these applications deployed. It provides application performance monitoring, which gives me the ability to know what's going on with that application, why, if it is failing, it's failing, and then be able to quickly resolve that problem, whether it's an underlying infrastructure problem or an application problem. And then lastly, being able to manage these applications, whether they're all on premises or they're scattered across multiple premises and multiple clouds. So with that, I'm running out of my 45-minute time. I really appreciate your time today. And what's going to happen is that this is the application piece, that piece that's riding on top of the underlying infrastructure. The next session will be on service delivery and automation, followed by talking about the underlying physical infrastructure and how we manage and configure and deploy that. So with that, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.